Now, you might be saying to yourself, when I talk about how the Chargers organization has been very fortunate and their fan base, to some degree, may be a bit spoiled, you're going to sit there and say, what the Sam hell are you talking about? Because last time I checked, over the last decade and a half, the Chargers have felt like a snake-bitten franchise, which is true. They haven't won a Super Bowl. That's true. They've had several playoff disappointments. Also true. Haven't even made it to the Super Bowl. Also true. Wasted almost a decade and a half of Phillip Rivers' career. At the end of the day, largely true. But there's still that piece of, over the past 20 years, if you want to get really technical, this organization had young Drew Brees, then got almost a decade and a half of Phillip Rivers. Like, I know it didn't pan out maybe the way you would like or the way you would hope, and in that time you had a franchise move from San Diego to Los Angeles, but it hasn't been all bad. It hasn't went as well as you might have wanted and not panned out quite the way you'd hoped, but it hasn't been all bad. And once you got into last offseason, like, it was obvious some big change was afoot as Phillip Rivers ended up signing a one-year deal with the Colts where he played the last year of his career before he retired. But the Chargers, for the first time in a long, long time, had some uncertainty at the quarterback position, and you don't know what they were going to do. You didn't know who was going to be the guy. And we ended up finding out that they were going to draft Justin Herbert 6th overall in last year's draft, and that you're pinning all the hopes of the franchise, the organization, the fan base, you name it, behind this young kid. Which for Chargers fans was certainly an interesting position to be in, especially when you saw Anthony Lynn was starting Tyrod Taylor week 1. Oh, Christ almighty. Luckily for all parties involved when it comes to the Chargers, though, is that was quickly rectified due to a medical mishap. And Herbert was thrown in at the last minute to start against the Chiefs and did so well, he never gave his job back. And now you're the Chargers, and you feel fortunate, good, lucky, what have you, that you go from Drew Brees to Phillip Rivers to the guy that has the most physical talent out of any of them, and in year one certainly looked the part of a future big-time franchise quarterback, a guy that you could potentially bang up against Mahomes in that division twice a year, and that's Justin Herbert. You spoiled, lucky asses. Shame on you for not doing better with the quarterbacks you've had over the past 20 years. We'll see how you either waste or properly get the most out of a young guy like a Herbert. At least the Chargers know they've likely got the dude. And that goes a long, long way. And it informs and guides what you do in the offseason. Like, they lost plenty of guys on this roster because they only had but so much salary cap space. So, you let Hunter Henry go to the Patriots. You lose Rayshawn Jenkins, Denzel Perryman, Melvin Ingram. So you took some hits on the defensive side of the ball. Casey Hayward as well, and then you had several offensive linemen last year like Feeney and Trey Turner, Sam Tevy. Like, they're all gone out of the picture. But then this team went out there and spent money differently in free agency in terms of shoring up and beefing up that offensive line, which is a critical, urgent need and importance because of the fact that you've probably got the quarterback now. So they went and signed Corey Linsley away from the Green Bay Packers, signed Matt Filer, Ode Abushi. So those are three guys that you're looking at probably being week 1 starters on this offensive line. Brought in Jared Cook as kind of like a short-term stopgap option at the tight end position. But remaking this team in the image of their quarterback, understanding that the quarterback is the most important thing, and you got to build around him with pieces and talent, especially when you're thinking about bringing in a Brandon Staley as the head coach. Anthony Lynn, to me, some people are going to point to, look how bad his special teams played against, like, let's say, the New England Patriots. To me, the day he got fired was the day that he started Tyrod Taylor. He must have seen something in training camp and in practice that made him think that Tyrod Taylor was a better quarterback for this team and gives this team the best chance to win compared to Justin Herbert. Because we all know that was proven out to be absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. That's why he got fired. That's why Brandon Staley was hired. Was to come in and be that young quarterback or that young head coach and see if you can build a connection and a relationship between him and Herbert that could carry you well into the future. Time will tell whether that works out or not. In terms of the draft, they got some notable guys. I think, especially the first round, Rayshawn Slater, the offensive tackle from Northwestern who opted out in 2020 due to COVID concerns. Here's a guy you're talking about that I liked a little bit better than Penei Sewell. I think he was a more natural left tackle, but he offered more versatility if you're even thinking about flipping him inside the guard. But again, talking about some of the money you spent in free agency on guys like Filer and Corey Lindsley, Abushi, so forth. Now you're adding another piece, a left tackle into the fold to potentially protect Herbert's blind side for the next decade. Like, it's really good. Then getting Asante Samuel Jr. in the second round. To me, in some ways, that reminds me a few years ago where they got Derwin James to drop to him at pick 17. Now it's in the second round, and they get somebody like Asante Samuel Jr. Might not have had some of the ideal measurements, but the dude can just flat out play. So you're looking at two guys there that I would anticipate having an impact on this team right away, especially in the case of Rashaan Slater, because Slater's going to be tasked with protecting the blind side of Justin Herbert. He's going to be having the keys to the franchise in his hands in a lot of ways, so he's got to be that dude. But I'm optimistic about the Chargers this year. I really am. I think some people are probably on board like I am. Some people are not quite so on board. Some people might be picking the Broncos as a surprise team out of this division instead of the Chargers. But I'm sorry. They've got Herbert. The Broncos don't have anything close to that. To me, and that makes a big difference. Herbert, looking at year one, here's a guy that there weren't a ton of rookie struggles. Like, he put up monster numbers. Like, he clearly looked like the dude. And now you just got to build up the team around him, which I point to another strength, which is that offensive line. They've invested quite a bit in there. I expect that unit to be upgraded and quite sizably in 2021 between free agency and what they did with drafting Slater in round one. And then the defensive star power that they have. There are certainly questions on the defensive side of the ball, and some of this is going to depend upon health, specifically of Derwin James. But if you're looking at building a defense that you feel like you could win a championship with, maybe they're not elite, but they're like a top 10 to 12 or top 12 to 15 unit, which with a great offense is more than sufficient to be able to win a championship in today's NFL. You've got a star at each of the three layers of that defense. You've got Joey Bosa on the D-line. You've got Kenneth Murray in the linebacking core. He's going to be a future star. And then Derwin James. We know what he can do. He's just got to be able to stay healthy. But you've got three core kind of young key building blocks there for this defense for the now and for the future. And if they can keep those guys healthy, like, that's going to bode well for them, especially with the chance to be able to work under a Brandon Staley. Look out. Some question marks certainly for this team. Pass rush, like Melvin Ingram's gone. Like, who's going to be able to get to the quarterback outside of Joey Bosa? The running game, Austin Eckler, to me is more of like a role-playing complementary type of guy versus a guy you really want to be the feature back. And then for this team, I mentioned before about just kind of how snake-bitten they are as a franchise. They had a lot of bad luck with injuries last year. Like, Bosa only played 12 games, so he missed a quarter of the season. Derwin didn't play a lick of time in the regular season. He missed the entire year. Chris Harris Jr. only played 9 games. Drew Chanquil only played the 1 game. And then his replacement, Kaiser White, only played 11 games. So all these guys, notable contributors, notable cogs on that team, all had injuries that required them to miss some, a good portion, if not all of the season. So can they avoid that bad luck with injuries? Can they avoid some of that snake-bitten shit we've seen out of the Chargers over the past years? We're going to find out. In terms of their schedule, I look at a couple of stretches. First is week 3 through 6. You got to go to Kansas City. Like, that's going to be a monster matchup in and of itself. Then you've got the Raiders and the Browns at home. And then you got to go to Baltimore. Like, if the Chargers, want to be a playoff team, they got to at least go 2-2 there. But if they want to be taken even more seriously, if they want to potentially be a threat to usurp the Kansas City Chiefs on top of the AFC West, then you want to win 3 or all 4 of those games, but no worse than 3 of them. And you want one of those wins to at least come against the Kansas City Chiefs to set you up better in the year, potentially in case you need the tiebreaker. And then I look at their last 6 games of the year, and there's certainly plenty of winnable games there. At Cincinnati, the Giants. This time they've got the Chiefs at home, even if it is a questionable home game for the Chargers. It's still in L.A. At Houston, hosting Denver, at the Raiders. Like, it's not inconceivable that in this team's last 6 games, they go 4-2, 5-1, maybe even 6-0. And if they do that, there's a very good likelihood that they're going to be a playoff team. This roster's not perfect, and they've still got some holes. I'm certainly not ready to anoint or crown their asses just yet. But I like some of what they've got here. And if they were in some other divisions, I'd be picking them to win the division. Like, this is a team right now, if you let them get into the playoffs, I don't want to see Herbert in the playoffs. I think this team could win something like 11 games, maybe finish 2-3 games behind the Chiefs. And if they do that, that will feel like tremendous growth and progress, a further validation that Justin Herbert was the right guy. He's going to be that dude for the franchise for the next 15 years. That Brandon Staley's probably the right choice at head coach, which really sets you up well for 2022 and beyond. To me, if you're a Chargers fan, there's plenty to be excited about with this team. It all starts with the quarterback and funnels down from there. They've got one. And when you've got one in the NFL, if you got a quarterback, you always have a chance.